Hi friends, I'm Ashley and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is another reading vlog, and in this video I'm going to be reading one of my most anticipated books of the year, and that book is The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. So I am super excited for this. So this is book one in a gothic romantasy duology, and I love Rachel Gillig's other gothic romantasy duology, The Shepherd King. So I am really excited for this one. And I just have to say that this book is like absolutely gorgeous, and I love the design of it so much. The one thing I have noticed, so this feels like heavier than like normal hardback books, and I'm wondering if it has to do with like the paper. But anyways, without further ado, I am going to hop into this, and I will be back after I read some with my first thoughts. Very interesting. Page 5 says, I did not know the color of my eyes. Hi, so it's now the next day, so it's Tuesday, May 27th, and I actually just started reading this morning. So I've just made it to chapter 10, page 113. So first, let me tell you a little bit about what this is about, and then I'll share my first thoughts. So our story is told in first person from the point of view of our main female character. And our main female character, she works as a diviner at a cathedral with 5 other girls who are also diviners. And she became a diviner when she was really young. And so she doesn't really have any memories of life before being a diviner. And all she really remembers is that her name was Sybil. But as diviners, they are not called by their real names. They're all given numbers. And so our main character is called 6. And even the girls themselves, when they're talking among each other, they refer to each other as those numbers because they don't know each other's true names. And the girls are required to work at the cathedral for 10 years, and then after they have been at the cathedral for 10 years, they'll get to leave and live a normal life. And as diviners, they wear shrouds over their faces, so none of them have seen each other's faces or their eye colors, and they are not allowed to take these shrouds off, so even them themselves don't know what their faces look like or what eye color they have. And so besides themselves, another person who lives at the cathedral is the abbess, and she takes care of the girls, and she's kind of like a mother figure to them, and she helps them with their divining. And when they divine, in order for them to have visions, they have to drown first, which is like really unsettling. Besides the diviners and the abbess, there's one other inhabitant that lives on the cathedral grounds, and that is the gargoyles. And so the gargoyles in this book, they are animated and they are alive, and they do various tasks at the cathedral, and they help protect the diviners and the abbess. And most of them are silent and don't talk, but there is one gargoyle in particular that talks, and he talks a lot, and he seems to be particularly attached to 6. And he also has this funny habit where he calls everyone Bartholomew. So at the start of our story, the newly crowned king of their kingdom, who is only 17 years old, ends up coming to the cathedral for a divination. And our main female character is the one who ends up divining for him. And her divination is full of bad omens. And so after the divination, the king and his knights that accompanied him end up spending the night on the cathedral grounds. And so Six ends up having an encounter with one of the knights. And of course this knight is our love interest, and his name is Roderick, or Rory as he seems to be called by his friends. And the two of them, Six and Roderick, get off to a bad start because it is made very clear that Roderick does not believe in the divinations or anything that they stand for. And so the two of them at the beginning very much have like the enemies to lovers vibes going on, because anytime they see each other, they quarrel with each other, yet at the same time they are drawn to each other. And then not long after the king and his knights depart from the cathedral, one of Six's fellow sister diviners ends up going missing. And the abbess sends out one gargoyle to look for her, but they do not find her. And then not so long after that, another diviner ends up going missing. And so again, the abbess sends out one gargoyle to look for her. And so this keeps happening until our main character ends up being the only diviner left. And so she is freaked out, and she realizes that the abbess doesn't really seem to care very much that all the other divining girls are missing. And so she ends up going to the king to ask for his help in finding her fellow sister diviners. And as a result, the one who ends up coming to help her is of course Roderick. And so that's where I'm at in the story right now, where Six and Roderick, along with the gargoyle that calls everyone Bartholomew, are about to head off on their quest. So now for my thoughts. So I feel like the beginning of this felt a little slow. Like the first 80-ish pages is spent on world building and just like getting to know the characters. And I felt like intrigued and interested in the characters in the world, but at that point I didn't yet feel completely pulled into the story. But then around page 84, the plot starts to get moving, and that's when I finally felt like I was being pulled into the story. And then I was actually going to stop and give my update 100 pages into this, but chapter 9, which ended on page 99, it ended in such a way where I had to read the next chapter because I needed to know what was going to happen, and that's the first time that I felt that while reading this book. And so I'm hoping like now that things are taking off, I'll continue feeling that way and not want to put this down. And so far I feel like very intrigued by the story, and I want to know exactly what is going on with the disappearance of these other diviners. And clearly like the abbess knows more than she is letting on, and it also seems like the gargoyle might also have like an idea of what's actually going on because of some comments that he's made so far throughout the story. Speaking of the gargoyle who calls everyone Bartholomew, he so far is probably my favorite character. He's just so fun and quirky. I'm also liking our main female character Six and Roderick, and especially when they're together, I already like their dynamic very much. And I'm also hoping that we get to know more about the king too, because we got to see him a little bit so far in this, and he seems like an interesting character as well. And then this definitely has like a creepy atmosphere so far, because just the way that the diviner's powers work just is really creepy, because in order for them to have visions, they first have to be like drowned in this special spring. So that in and of itself is just very unsettling and disturbing. And then we've also got a glimpse that there might be other magic in the world as well, because our love interest Roderick actually just recently showed off a magical ability that he has, so I want to know more about that. So far, those are all my thoughts at the moment. I'm not very far into this, but I think so far this is off to a very promising start. So it is now a lot later in the afternoon and I am back with a reading update because I just finished chapter 20 and I'm going to be starting chapter 21, so I am on page 258, so I am more than halfway through this because it's just under 400 pages. And I'm happy to say that I've been very much enjoying this. Like, the last 150 pages of this book have just been so much fun. And one of the reasons this book has been so fun is definitely because of our talking gargoyle. But the writing style itself also has like a sense of humor to it at times as well. And one example is the beginning of chapter 10 on page 113. Just like the first paragraph of this chapter is so funny. So I'm going to read it. There's not really any spoilers in this little paragraph. It reads, Rory's horse was called Fig, and Fig's greatest flaw or virtue was that she refused to be rushed. She stiffed my face for 5 whole minutes before she let me sit on her back behind Rory, then took 10 minutes more snaffling boysenberries from a bramble. It was only after she had finished, when Rory's threats had increased tenfold, that she began to idly trot down the Holloway Road. And I just found that so amusing to read, and it made me laugh. Then another thing I've really been enjoying these last 150 pages is the romance. So there's been a lot of scenes between Six and Rory, and them just having alone time together in these last 150 pages, and I just love the scenes with them. They just make me so giddy because they're full of tension and yearning and banter. They're just so good. And then in addition to those elements, the world building and magic system has also been expanded and explained more in these last 150 pages as well. And the magic system, it reminds me a little bit of the magic system in the Shepherd Kings duology, but it also feels unique to the world of this story as well. And speaking of the world building, in this book there are also sprites, and some of them are small like you would think a sprite would be, but also they seem to come in like all shapes and sizes because there are sprites in here that are as big as hills and resemble boars. And even though like our characters have had to fight off these sprites on several occasions, it doesn't seem like they are inherently evil because there has been numerous mentions of how the sprites look hungry, how they look starved, and it seems like the reason that they are not getting the food that they need is because the humans are taking their resources. So these sprites are just pretty much lashing out against humans because they are hungry, and humans are the cause of their hunger. And also Rory has made comments about how like sprites have never wronged him, and so that's why he is always kind to them. Then the chapter that I just read, there was some revelations near the end of that chapter, and also our main character, her shroud, ends up falling off her face during a certain event in that chapter. And I've been waiting to see like her take off her shroud and finally look at her face because she has never done so. Earlier in this book, one of the other diviners takes off her shroud, but Six turns away. She doesn't look because she's always been taught not to look at her face and not to look at the other diviner's face. But the diviner who takes off her shroud and looks at her own face ends up like making an exclamation, and it was like, what did they do to us? And so it has made me curious to find out what their faces look like. And so I'm hoping in the next chapter that Six will finally be able to look into a mirror and see her own reflection, and we'll get an answer to that mystery. So those are all my thoughts so far, and my next update will probably be with my final thoughts when I finish this. Hi, so I had finished The Night and the Moth, and after finishing it, I decided to do a journal spread for it because I ended up loving this book. I'm giving it 5 stars, and I ended up pretty much loving everything about it. I loved our main female character, Six, Sybil, and the male love interest, Rory. I loved their dynamic and their banter, and just seeing their relationship develop over the course of the novel. And it was just so much fun seeing them going from not really liking each other and being at each other's throats to becoming like reluctant allies and then becoming friends and then becoming more than friends. There were just so many scenes with them that just made me so giddy and made me want to kick my feet. It's definitely one of those romances where the male love interest will burn the world down for our main female character. Also love the gothic dark fairy tale vibes of this book, and I really like the world that Rachel Gillig crafted in this book with like the omens and the diviners and the gargoyles. It was just like all very fascinating to read about. And uncovering the truth behind the history of the Diviners and the Omens was one of the things, along with the romance, that just kept me flipping the pages. And there was a lot of revelations in the final pages of this book, and one of the things that we finally found out about was we got the story of the gargoyle that calls everyone Bartholomew. We finally got his story in the end, so I'm really happy that we got his story. And speaking of the final pages of this book, the last chapter of this book was kind of crazy. So before that last chapter, everything was wrapping up really well, and too well, because this is the first book in a duology, and Rachel Gillig, her other duology, the first book in that duology, ended on an awful cliffhanger. So I was expecting something awful to happen. And in the last chapter of the book, that awful thing finally happened. And I wasn't completely surprised by what happened, because before that there had been some like hints of something going on with a certain character, but at the same time I didn't really expect what did happen to happen, so I was surprised in that way. But yeah, so this one also ended on an awful cliffhanger like One Dark Window did, so I need like the next book in this duology right away. So those are all my thoughts on The Night and the Moth. I would definitely recommend it, especially if you were a fan of the Shepherd King duology, because I feel like this one has similar vibes to that book. They're both gothic fantasies. But if you read this book, let me know down below what you thought of it. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye!